Chapter 10, Pace. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. In the midst of the great age of exploration in the early years of the 20th century, the most sought-after goal in the world was to reach the South Pole. It had never been done before in all of recorded human history, not by Pytheas, the first polar explorer, circa 320 BCE, not by the Vikings 1,000 years later, not by the Royal Navy in all its prowess during the years of the Great British Empire. November 1911, two rivals for the pole aimed to be the first to achieve this elusive goal. Captain Robert Falcon Scott from Great Britain and Roald Amundsen from Norway, otherwise known as the Last Viking. They began within days of each other, a 1,500-mile race against time, a race of life and death. One team would return victorious, the other would not return. To read their journals, however, you would never guess that the two teams made the exact same journey, under the exact same conditions. On the good weather days, Scott would drive his team to exhaustion. On bad weather days, he would hunker down in his tent and lodge his complaints in his journal. On one such day, he wrote, "Our luck in weather is preposterous. It makes me feel a little bitter to contrast such weather with that experience by our predecessors." On another, he wrote, "I doubt if any party could travel in such weather." But one party could. On a day of a similar blizzard, Amundsen recorded in his journal, "It has been an unpleasant day, storm, drift, and frostbite, but we have advanced 13 miles closer to our goal." On December 12, 1911, the plot thickened. Amundsen and his team got within 45 miles of the South Pole, closer than anyone who had ever tried before. They had traveled some 650 grueling miles and were on the verge of winning the race of their lives. And the icing on the cake, the weather that day was working in their favor. Amundsen wrote, "Going and surface as good as ever, weather splendid, calm sunshine." There on the polar plateau, they had the ideal conditions to ski and sled their way to the South Pole. With one big push, they could be there in a single day. Instead, it took 3 days. Why? From the very start of their journey, Amundsen had insisted that his party advance exactly 15 miles each day, no more, no less. The final leg would be no different. Rain or shine, Amundsen would not allow the daily 15 miles to be exceeded. While Scott allowed his team to rest only on the days when it froze and pushed his team to the point of inhuman exertion on the days when it thawed, Amundsen insisted on plenty of rest and kept a steady pace for the duration of the trip to the South Pole. This one simple difference between their approaches can explain why Amundsen's team made it to the top while Scott's team perished. Setting a steady, consistent, sustainable pace was ultimately what allowed the party from Norway to reach their destination without particular effort, as Roland Hunford, the author of a fascinating book on this race to the South Pole, explains. Without particular effort. They accomplished a feat that had eluded adventurers for millennia. Of course, not every day was easy, but even under the harshest of conditions, the goal was doable, thanks to that one simple rule. They would not exceed 15 miles a day, no matter what. On December 14th, 1911, Amundsen led his team to become the first in recorded history to reach the South Pole, and then they safely made the 16,000-mile journey home. Meanwhile, Scott and his exhausted, demoralized team arrived at the pole, only to find they were some 34 days too late. Their return journey was even more wretched. The team staggered on in total exhaustion, frostbite taking its ghastly toll until all 5 men froze to death. Some of them were so certain this would be their fate, they wrote notes they hoped their friends and family would one day read. The false economy of powering through. When we try to make too much progress on a goal or project right out of the gate, we can get trapped in a vicious cycle. We get tired, so then we take a break, but then we think we have to make up for the time lost, so we sprint again. For example, I had a friend who was desperate to finish writing her business plan. So one weekend she decided to spend every waking minute on it. She powered through, but it burnt her out to the point that she couldn't bear to think about the plan, much less work on it again for weeks. She said, "When I tried, my brain just shut down." As a teenager, I set a goal to compete in a 3-mile cross-country race where I grew up in Yorkshire, England. When the day arrived, I was nervous. With my parents and grandparents looking on, I made my way to the starting line. Even though I didn't feel fully prepared, I could have done okay if I had started the way I intended, slowly. I like to run that way, to start slow and gradually pick up speed, feeling the rush of adrenaline as I passed other runners from behind. But my nerves got the better of me. I threw out my game plan and shot out of the gate along with other runners. I sprinted hard for the first 100 yards, then had to pause, gasping for breath, just 100 yards in. Eventually I caught my breath, but the damage had been done, and followed behind, and I remained behind the whole time. It was painful. I came in 57th place out of 60 runners. In hindsight, the cost of that sprint was more than the loss of just one race. The loss was humiliating enough that I never again competed in any other cross-country meets. When we're trying to achieve something that matters to us, it's tempting to want to sprint out of the gate. The problem is that going too fast at the beginning will almost always slow us down the rest of the way. The cost of this boom and bust approach to getting important projects done is too high. We feel exhausted on the days we sprint hard, drained and demoralized on the days we don't, and more often than not, we wind up like those British explorers, feeling battered and broken and still no closer to achieving our goal. Luckily, there is an alternative. We can find the effortless pace, the upside of upper bounds. In my early days as an aspiring author, I was passionate and motivated, but inconsistent. I would write some days. I'd talk about writing on other days. And I'd talk about what I was thinking about writing on other days in between. Meanwhile, I had a musician friend who decided to write a book about her songs. She was prolific in how much music she had produced. She had written over 3,000 songs, 101 albums, and 9 cantatas. Her music had been featured around the world, including at national prayer breakfasts, at presidential inauguration, and on the Oprah Winfrey Show. It was breathtaking to see all that she'd accomplished at her steady pace over many years. But how would she fare as a writer? Quite well, as it turned out. She decided she would choose 100 songs and tell the story behind each of them. She would write 2 stories a week, so it was manageable, she explained. And when those 2 stories were finished, she would stop work for the week, even if she had the energy and appetite to write more. 2 stories a week was her upper bound. I was stunned to learn that within 9 months her book was finished and sent to the publisher. Meanwhile, I was still working on mine intermittently. Holding back when you still have steam in you might seem like a counterintuitive approach to getting important things done, but in fact this kind of restraint is key to breakthrough productivity. As Lisa Jewell, author of some 18 best-selling novels, put, "Pace yourself. If you write too much too quickly, you'll go off at tangents and lose your way, and if you write infrequently, you'll lose your momentum. 1,000 words a day is a good ticking over amount." Ben Bergeron is a former Ironman triathlete who trains the fittest athletes in the United Kingdom. Clearly, he is not lacking in the physical stamina to work extra hours when a client requires it, but he has a rule that keeps him performing well professionally and personally. He leaves the office at 5:25 p.m. every single day. On a slow day, he leaves the office at 5:25 p.m. On a busy day, he leaves the office at 5:25 p.m. It's non-negotiable. Even if he is in a meeting, as soon as the clock strikes 5:25 p.m., he just stands up and walks to the door. He doesn't have to think about it. By now, everyone he works with knows that no rudeness is intended, and simply that his upper bound is 5:25 p.m. Whether it's miles per day, or words per day, or hours per day, there are a few better ways to achieve effortless pace than to set an upper bound. The right range. All of us want to achieve our desired outcomes. Complete the manuscript, run the 5K, launch a product as quickly as possible. So it makes sense that we all prefer days when we make more progress than less. After all, few things in life are satisfying as the feeling of accomplishment, but in our overenthusiasm for getting things done, we may make the mistake of thinking that all progress is created equal. All progress is not created equal. One of our daughters learned this the hard way when we made her responsible for taking care of the chickens. Yes, we have chickens. This included collecting their eggs, feeding them, and refilling their water. We encouraged her to do so every day, but she reasoned that skipping the chore for a few days and then doing more every third day was really the same thing. After all, she argued, she could collect 3 times more eggs and leave 3 times more food and water all at once. But then there's an unexpected change in the weather. It turned hot. This meant that the chickens drank more water than usual, and the remaining water evaporated more quickly than normal. Our daughter was devastated when she informed us that one of her chickens had died in the heat because they ran out of water. So much in life is out of our control. The weather is out of our control. Wildfires, hurricanes, and new strains of coronaviruses are out of our control. Our kids getting a cold, the car breaking down, a friend going through a hard time who needs our counsel. How can we maintain a steady pace when any number of unexpected crises could pop up and throw us off schedule? Since the end of the Cold War, the military has used the acronym VUCA to describe our global environment, one that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In response to this new normal, the military has developed several approaches we can apply to make it easier to do what matters most on our own everyday battlegrounds. One is captured in the military mantra: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Meaning, when you go slow, things are smoother, and when things are smooth, you can move faster. This is particularly true in conflicts where the ability to move in a coordinated fashion while staying alert to possible threats from every direction, and often while carrying weapons, is key. If you stop or move too slowly, you can become an easy target. But if you move too fast, you get surrounded and outflanked. As consultant Joe Indvik writes, Indvik continues, if you look closely at how elite infantry move, it looks like this: somewhere between a walk and a run, underscored by quick but careful footfalls, with weapons raised while rhythmically scanning the battlefield in all directions. Less experienced infantry, he says, will often zealously sprint into battle and give the impression of momentum. The problem with this approach is that as soon as they are in danger, they will have to sprint to take cover at the first chance they get, and may end up in a place where they haven't had time to survey or assess. Like the proverbial hare, this cycle of sprint and recover may seem fast in the moment, but long-term progress through the environment is slow and plagued by unidentified threats. When you go slow, things are smoother. You have time to observe, to plan, to coordinate efforts, but go too slow and you may get stuck or lose your momentum. This is just as true in life and work as it is on the battlefield. To make progress, despite the complexity and uncertainty we encounter on a daily basis, we need to choose the right range and keep within it. Even when we want to make consistent, steady progress on a priority project, life often intervenes. We may have planned to spend the morning at our desk and instead find ourselves stuck in meetings. We may have blocked off hours on our calendar for important work and instead find ourselves dealing with a toddler meltdown. Then to compensate for our perceived lack of productivity, we work all the way through the weekend in a mad rush for progress. We know this comes at a cost: low quality work, increased guilt, and reduced confidence. There is an easier alternative. We can establish upper and lower bounds and simply use the following rule: never less than X, never more than Y. Finding the right range keeps us moving at a steady pace so we can make consistent progress. The lower bound should be high enough to keep us feeling motivated and low enough that we can still achieve it on days when we're dealing with unexpected chaos. The upper bound should be high enough to constitute good progress, but not so high as to leave us feeling exhausted. Once we get into the rhythm, the progress begins to flow. We are able to take effortless action.